For the first time in modern Canadian history, a breakup of the country is being debated as a serious near-term possibility, not a fringe theory. On October 19th, the wealthiest province in Canada will hold a referendum that could begin the legal process of leaving the Federation. Alberta sits on the world's fourth largest proven oil reserves at roughly 167 billion barrels and is one of the single largest net contributors of Ottawa's revenues. Yet, support for separation now runs as high as 30% in recent polling. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has publicly called Alberta a, quote, natural partner for the United States, and a data breach in May exposed the personal records of 2.9 million Alberta voters through an app reportedly built by the U.S. political operatives tied to the Trump administration. So today, we break down what is actually happening with the Alberta referendum, the role Washington is reportedly playing behind the scenes, and what this all means for the Canadian dollar, markets, and the future of Canada itself. My name is Nick, and this is the Finance Bureau. Between 2007 and 2024, Alberta sent Ottawa $285 billion more in taxes than it ever got back in federal spending. The province generates over $17,000 per person in revenue, about $7,000 more per head than Quebec. Yet, Quebec will receive $13.9 billion in equalization payments this year alone, more than half of the entire $27.2 billion national pool. So what exactly is equalization? Well, it's a federal program that takes money from Canada's overall revenues and redistributes it to provinces deemed to have a weaker ability to raise taxes. The idea is that every Canadian, no matter where they reside, should have access to roughly the same level of public services at roughly the same level of taxation. Provinces with a smaller tax base get a top-up. Provinces with a larger tax base, like Alberta, contribute more to federal coffers than they receive. And here is where Alberta's grievance gets sharper. The Fraser Institute notes that Quebec's government-owned electricity company charges its residents 7.8 cents per kilowatt hour, compared to 15.1 cents in Ontario. By keeping power prices artificially low, Hydro-Quebec reports lower revenues. Lower revenues feed straight into the equalization formula as weaker fiscal capacity. Weaker fiscal capacity means bigger payments from Ottawa. If Quebec raised its electricity prices by just 4 cents, around 70% of the extra revenue would be clawed back through the equalization reductions. In other words, the system pays Quebec to charge less. Alberta has watched this play out for decades while writing the checks to fund it. Layer on top of that the cancellation of Keystone XL in 2021, the abandonment of Energy East and Northern Gateway, and Bill C-69, dubbed the No More Pipelines Act by then Premier Jason Kenney, and you have the political pressure that has been building up inside Alberta for over a decade. Oil and gas investment in the province collapsed from $64.7 billion in 2014 to $25.3 billion in 2024. That's a 61% decline in inflation-adjusted terms. And this is the backdrop against which the citizen petition began. In late April, a separatist group called Stay Free Alberta, led by lawyer Jeffrey Rath, submitted 301,620 signatures to Elections Alberta, seeking to trigger a binding referendum on independence. A pro-Canada counter-petition called Forever Canadian gathered around 404,000 signatures in favor of remaining inside the Federation, exceeding the separatist total by more than 100,000 votes. Together, over 700,000 Albertans have now formally signed paperwork on one side or the other of the question. And then on the 13th of May, Justice Shina Leonard of the Alberta Court of King's Bench quashed the separatist petition. The ruling found that Alberta's chief electoral officer had committed a legal error by approving the petition without consulting First Nations under Treaties 7 and 8. Justice Leonard wrote, quote, "As a matter of logic and common sense, there can be no question that Alberta's secession from Canada will have an impact on those treaty nations." Premier Danielle Smith called the ruling, quote, "incorrect in law and, quote, anti-democratic." And 8 days later, on the 21st of May, she went on television and scheduled the referendum herself. The ballot question is 37 words long, and it is the single most important sentence in this entire story. It reads, quote, "Should Alberta remain a province of Canada, or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada?" Notice what the question is not. It is not a direct vote on independence. It is a vote on whether to begin a process toward a future binding vote. Smith herself stated publicly, quote, "I support Alberta remaining in Canada, and this is how I would vote in a provincial referendum on separation." She has pledged to campaign on the pro-Canada side while honoring what she calls, quote, "sovereignty within a united Canada." Separatist lawyer Jeffrey Rath called the wording cynical, dishonest, and a stab in the back to the petition signatories. And the polling reinforces why this wording matters so much. Support for outright independence has run between 18 and 30% across recent surveys, with one outlier poll from the Hub recording a temporary spike to 42% in early May. Opposition consistently sits around 67%. And polymarket odds of a yes vote moved from 9% to 17% following Smith's announcement, nearly doubling, but still pricing in independence as a minority outcome. Now, before we get into the Washington dimension, if you want to make sense of what is actually moving across global finance, monetary policy, and political risk, then you should sign up for the Finance Bureau newsletter. It's absolutely free and it lands in your inbox every week. All you have to do is click the link in the description or scan this QR code on the right of your screen. And now, back to Alberta, because what is happening between Calgary and Washington has no precedent in modern Canadian history. Separatist lawyer Jeffrey Rath has conducted multiple fact-finding trips to Washington to meet with Trump administration officials about potential U.S. support for lines of credit for an independent Alberta. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has publicly described Alberta as a natural partner for the United States and noted that Albertans are, quote, "very independent." And then on the 30th of April, President Trump signed a presidential permit authorizing the Bridger pipeline expansion. The project is a partnership between Canadian company Southbow, which holds the cancelled Keystone XL assets, and US-based Bridger Pipeline. It would move Canadian crude from Phillips County, Montana, down to Guernsey, Wyoming, with initial capacity of 550,000 barrels per day. Crucially, it reuses approximately 150 kilometers of pipe already installed in Alberta for the defunct Keystone XL project. So, Washington is seeking to revive the corridor that Ottawa walked away from. But the most concerning thread about this entire story is the data breach. In May, an outfit called the Centurion Project was found to be running a searchable online database containing the names, addresses, phone numbers, and voter registration details of approximately 2.9 million Albertans. The source data was the official Alberta list of electors, illegally provided to the pro-independence Republican Party of Alberta, then improperly transferred onward. The tool was reportedly built by a US political operative with ties to the Trump administration and linked to the Take Back Alberta founder, David Parker. On the 30th of April, the Court of King's Bench granted an emergency injunction forcing the database to shut down. Elections Alberta has since issued 568 cease and desist letters to individuals who accessed it. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Alberta Privacy Commissioner, and Elections Alberta are all conducting active investigations. And the British Columbia Premier characterized the broader effort by separatist organizers to seek US assistance as treasonous. Now, those of you with long memories of a previous experience of Canadian politics might be wondering what makes the Alberta situation different from the Quebec referendums of 1980 and 1995. Well, in Quebec, the separatist movement was internal, a domestic political project rooted in language and cultural sovereignty. Over here, you have a foreign administration courting a Canadian province, a cabinet-level US official describing that province as a natural partner, voter data flowing through a tool reportedly built by operatives linked to that same administration, and the 51st state rhetoric circulating in American commentators' circles as recurring background noise. As such, that has become a lot more than just a domestic constitutional debate. Which brings us to the Canadian federal response and the constitutional reality that ultimately binds all of this together. Prime Minister Mark Carney has consistently described Alberta as essential to Canada and emphasized what he calls cooperative federalism. On the 15th of May, he signed an implementation agreement with Premier Smith, fast-tracking a new oil pipeline to the Pacific coast. Alberta will submit a proposal to the Federal Major Projects Office by the 1st of July. Ottawa will then pursue a project of national interest designation by October the 1st. Construction is targeted to begin by the 1st of September 2027 with capacity of 1 million barrels per day to Pacific markets. In return for this, Alberta's industrial carbon price stays at $95 per tonne for the remainder of 2026, rising to $100 from 2027 through 2030. Carney has stated publicly that a new oil pipeline out of Alberta is now more likely than not. And the deal is widely read as political judo, an attempt to pull the economic rug from under the separatist argument by demonstrating that Alberta's grievance can be addressed inside the Federation rather than outside it. But it has come at a political cost. A group of 14 Liberal MPs sent a private letter to Carney in late April warning that conceding too much on pipeline and carbon prices threatened the party's credibility. The BC Premier called the energy deal, quote, rewarding bad behaviour and, quote, blackmail by a state premier threatening to leave the Federation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said, quote, I would never ever put that poll to Ontarians, calling their referendum an unproductive gamble and a disaster for Alberta. Pierre Poilievre has committed that all Conservatives will campaign for Alberta to remain inside the Federation. And underneath all of this sits the constitutional reality. The Clarity Act of 2000 governs any path to provincial secession. It requires the House of Commons to determine that the referendum question is clear, meaning explicitly about secession, not about a process toward a future vote. It requires a clear majority, not merely 50% plus one. And it requires constitutional negotiations involving the federal government, all provinces, and Indigenous groups. Legal experts note that the current Alberta ballot question may not even constitute a clear question under the Act's terms, meaning Ottawa could decline to recognize the result as triggering Clarity Act negotiations at all. Beyond that, actual secession would likely require the Section 41 unanimity procedure under the Constitution Act of 1982, meaning every other provincial legislator would hold a veto. The Supreme Court's Quebec secession referendum of 1998 established there is no right to unilateral secession. And then there's the deepest obstacle of all. Treaties 6, 7, and 8 were signed with the Crown, meaning the federal government, not with Alberta as a province. So if Alberta left Canada, it would no longer be part of the Crown's treaty obligations. First Nations leaders argue this would amount to a unilateral extinguishment of treaty rights, which is impermissible under both Canadian and international law. And this fundamental rights question cannot be resolved without the consent of a dozen First Nations. Which brings us to what all of this would actually mean for the markets and your portfolio. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Business Council of Alberta have both warned of an investment chill resulting from the referendum uncertainty. Calgary Chamber CEO Deborah Yedlin put it bluntly, stating that uncertainty is the enemy of investment and that ambiguity causes capital to stay on the sideline. Morningstar DBRS has noted that businesses may take a slower approach or pause investment decisions until the political dust actually settles. The vote itself is estimated to cost between $50 million and $100 million to administer. and full separation cost estimates run as high as $130 billion over a decade, though the figure is highly debated. University of Calgary economist Trevor Tombay estimates an independent Alberta could see its economy contract by roughly 4%, representing a loss of around $3,900 per person per year. A credible yes result in October would likely trigger immediate downward pressure on the currency, widen Canadian credit spreads, and force the Bank of Canada, currently holding interest rates at 2.25%, into a difficult choice between cutting to buffer a constitutional shock and hiking to defend a collapsing currency. And the questions an independent Alberta would actually face are not abstract. There would be a currency choice to be made between keeping the Canadian dollar without monetary representation, creating a new Alberta dollar, or adopting the US dollar. Trade access under USMCA is not automatic and would have to be renegotiated, with 91% of Alberta energy exports going to the US. A share of Canada's roughly $1.3 trillion federal debt would have to be negotiated, while the cost of building a central bank, a military, and border infrastructure from scratch would be astronomical. So here is the situation as it actually stands. Alberta is unlikely to leave Canada in the near term. The polling is against it. The constitutional obstacles are immense. The Indigenous veto is legally and morally absolute. And the pro-Canada petition signatures still exceed the separatist ones. But the grievances driving the movement are real. The equalization formula has not been substantively reformed in over 6 decades. The next review is not scheduled until 2029. And Washington has injected itself into Canadian provincial debate in a way that has no precedent in modern history. October 19th will trigger a multi-year period where Canadian constitutional risk becomes a recurring line item in every analyst report on the Canadian dollar, every sovereign credit assessment, and every major capital allocation decision involving Canadian energy infrastructure. Of course, the Federation may hold. The 1995 precedent suggests that when forced into a corner, Canadians choose unity. But the cost of holding it together is now being negotiated in real time, in public, with a foreign administration watching from the sidelines and offering its support. The uncertainty that stalks so much of the world is starting to make itself at home in one of these supposedly most stable nations on Earth. And that alone tells us a lot about the world we live in today. But what do you reckon? Does Canada survive the referendum with the Federation intact? Or does the US interference change the game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to understand how the shifting US-Canada trade relationship is reshaping North American capital flows, then you can check out our video on that right over here. And that's all from me today. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. This is Nick, signing off.